Hello and welcome to EduCurious. Today we have special guest with us, Donna Dunson. I'm so thrilled to have her on our show. She has a wealth of knowledge. She's spent many years in education, and I've got a whole lineup of questions for her. So welcome, Donna. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
I
Thanks.
want to start out by asking you, what is your story and how did you get to where you are today?
I thought I didn't want to be a teacher because I had a few teachers in my family, and I'm 73. So I'm of the age that was coming along and there were more opportunities. So I said, I will never be a teacher. So anyway, went and worked for a firm in Palm Beach, a stock brokerage firm. And I loved learning about it, but on a day-to-day basis, I said, that's not what I wanted to do. So I'll compress this. Came back to Winter Haven, which was my hometown, ended up substituting actually for a fifth grade class at Jewett in Winter Haven. And I loved it. I substituted for someone that was on maternity leave. And I thought, wow, this is kind of fun. And I was teaching science, and it was just, I thought, well, maybe I need to rethink this. So I got a degree from University of West Florida. And so I went back after that, and I said, well, I'm going to get a master's. And then I got, my teaching credentials as well. Went in Pensacola, went to, started out in a Catholic school, taught there for about 2 years. I liked it, but I thought, yikes, I don't want to. You'd look at your paycheck and said, maybe I don't want to do this. Anyway, got out for a while, was a DJ, was a radio news person at WCOA. I don't even know if that even exists anymore. So yeah, and then decided I started teaching an adjunct professor at Polk State, teaching English, and I thought, well, just give it up. This is what you were meant to do. So I went back, started teaching, and loved it. And I taught history, I taught English, gifted English, and journalism, and just loved it. And then I was this principal at the time, his name was J.P. Cohn. He said, there's a program that I think you may be interested in that I want to implement here. This was a large public high school, a little larger than Lake Wales, probably similar demographics. And so it was the International Baccalaureate program. So once I read their philosophy, learned more about it, I really just dove into it. So that was my first administrative role. And I love teaching. I just loved it. But so it kind of evolved. We started with 96 kids who are now in their 50s. And it was a fantastic experience. So we went IB. I did that for quite a few years. And then time to move on. And so I applied for a job at Atlanta International School, which I thought I would never get, even though I was involved with IB on international committees and that sort of thing. I thought that was a long shot. Before Atlanta, I was voted to be on the International Baccalaureate, basically their board of directors. First, I was on the one in the US, and then I was one of 15 of IB coordinators, heads of school on this committee, and it was amazing. And so I learned so much. I just soaked it up because we met all over the world, learned about school systems in different parts of the world, everything I could get my hands on to read. I loved it and traveled, and made friends who were educators all over Jordan, Africa, Norway. So I feel like I got this incredible education doing that and just soaking up what people had to learn. Then took a job in East Hampton, New York, which is kind of interesting, a private school called the Ross School. And there it was definitely, Atlanta was Atlanta International School, very different from Pensacola High School, and Ross School, very different in many ways. So East Hampton, with all that entails, funds that seemingly were endless, and the founder was very involved. The school had two philosophers that were, just hired to talk with kids and help them understand philosophy in class, but also outside of class. I mean, the resources were incredible. And the woman who founded this, her husband was head of Time Warner. So technology was amazing. So that was, wow, that was very different. And I took a sabbatical, came back here, heard about to stay just for 6 months or a year. And then my cousin heard about Lakewell's charter schools, and she was friends with someone that was working on it. Met Robin Gibson, and that's, I actually applied for superintendent, didn't get it. Clint Wright got it, and that was the absolute right decision. Even though, my experience could hold its own, no way. Clint Wright was the absolute right decision for that. And I adore him, and his legacy certainly lives on. So he called me and he said, why don't you be my assistant superintendent? So early on, we started out with that. And I talked to Clint one time. I said, this system is too small. It doesn't need an assistant superintendent. So I ended up landing at Polk Avenue because the principal was retiring. And Gail Quam and I worked together. Absolutely learned so much from Gail Quam. She's an amazing educator. Just amazing. And had a ball with some of the teachers there. My experience had mostly been in middle school, mostly high school, but some middle school. So I needed to be a student and dig in deep. But high school kids are they're just taller elementary kids in many ways. Some of the same issues. They still like stickers, all those things that you certainly know. So Polk Avenue, they wanted to do a middle school. I was asked by Clint if I could design this middle school. We had very rare in education, and I am so grateful, but we had free reign to design the curriculum, to hire people. I mean, it was just amazing. I gave updates to the board. We had, it wasn't easy. We had to delay 3 times, I believe. And some people said, oh, kids aren't going to come to that, all kinds of stuff. An incredible experience. And I took some of the work and philosophy that I had explored at Atlanta International School, and more so at the Ross School, was looking at all education through the lens of architecture and design. And that's what we built Bach around. And it was perfect to name it Edward Bach because he was quintessential Renaissance guy. What he did at Bach Tower and the environmental considerations, the political aspects, all of it. So we designed Bach around that, his legacy, but also the notion that if you understand design, you can dissect a sentence, a frog, a political system. So all the words in that and design elements. Then Dr. Jackson asked me to go to the high school. Told him I didn't want to do that because I don't believe in large high schools because it loses something. And in a weak moment, 6 weeks later, I just said, okay. So anyway, I did it. And it was, I proved a lot to myself, and I dispelled some of the things I didn't think would work, but also used the metaphor of design to restructure Lakewell's high school. And so the high school, and I am so proud of working with those teachers there. Amazing. Every step along the way, from Polk Avenue to Bach to the high school. Phenomenal educators, the core group. And the scores started to rise, and yeah. Okay.
What do you think in your career in education has been your biggest accomplishment?
Well, it's not just my accomplishment. I need to start there because, the team that I've been very fortunate to have amazing assistants. My, number two person, some really good ones. Of course, Nudge Sarand is otherworldly there because he was amazing. And Karen Blackwelder and the whole team. I've just been fortunate and learned from them. That is a hard one because when you say that, I think of individual kids. I'll tell you one story that pops into my mind that just happened. And it's a young man from Pensacola. And I had not heard from him since he dropped out of the IB program. He's now 40 or something. And just, it just wasn't for him at that time. So I get a Facebook message from him and said, "You may not remember me." And then I looked him up and I absolutely remembered him. So I had not talked to him or seen him since he left that school in Pensacola when he was 17 or 18. And so we met at a local Jimmy John's in Pensacola because I was up there visiting a friend. And it was incredible. He told me his story. He just said, "I never felt I was smart enough." He said, "But I felt like you always said, he said, you took me and looked me in the eye and said, you can do this." He said, "But I didn't believe you." And he ended up in prison, I think twice. And he's out now. He's getting he will be graduating from Pensacola State College in May. And I'm going to his graduation, but we had this, and we, communicated back and forth. But just those kind of things that you think, wow, and then reconnected. So I think for me, particularly, this side of 74, it's in the individual stories of the kids that I've had the pleasure of working with through the years. And, I'm old, so there've been quite a few of them, and they'll pop up one way or another way, and you go, wow, and I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook and Instagram, but more Facebook, because of all the stuff we know. But it has enabled me to see the successes of these amazing kids through the years, and whether they were public, private, black, white, male, female, so that has fed me, I think, through the years. Doing an IB program in two schools where it was unlikely. When we did the IB program in Pensacola, I was actually asked by the newspaper because it wasn't considered the premier school in Pensacola. There were, how that goes. There were a couple others. And someone said, "Well, why would the county put this in that school?" And I said, "Because my principal had the initiative to want it." But you got a lot of that. But when we started it, people started coming back from other schools, and families that had since left were coming back. Kind of the same thing in Lake Wales. I think people in Lake Wales, some of them felt like, why is that going there? Those kids will never measure up. Well, they certainly did measure up, and measured up very quickly. The scholarships by any measure, the scores. And these are kids, high poverty kids, a lot of them, that people thought, nah, they'll never put in the hard work, all the stuff that Amber. So I would say beating the odds and turning some schools into places where people didn't think you would see a turnaround, or where Bach is another, that was a gift to be able to do that and have it become an A the first year, and just had a long run of A's. And those kids, oh my gosh, when I moved to the high school, a lot of the Bach kids are the ones that really helped me turn around the high school. And, they spoke and said, it was just, yeah. So I think quantitatively, the stats on that, the increasing the kids going off to college, or the kids that were, may not go off to college, but post-secondary education was important, because I have one truck driver who went to Lake Wales High School, and he barely made it just because he was busy working and all of this. And I'll never forget, I saw him when they called his name, and he was at the end of the line down there at the Legion Field, and his knees buckled, and he was crying. I was crying, because it was, he kept fighting. And that was as exciting for me as a kid getting a scholarship to Cornell or Harvard, because in that boy's life, he's now a truck driver, and he sends these amazing inspirational messages. So yeah, those kind of stories.
What do you think your biggest strength is in the teaching world or in the leadership? You spent more time in leadership. What is your biggest strength?
Maybe seeing what could be, and, having an idea of what it could look like when it's just in your brain, just really seeing, and then being able to say, okay, if that's it, what do we have to do to get there? And again, this is the design process. You go a few steps, you examine what you've done, you do another iteration and move it again and move it on, because made mistakes all along the way. But I would say being able to see, and just like this kid sent me something not too long ago, and she said, you saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And, maybe that is because I've seen people from unlikely circumstances accomplish, magnificent things. So just trying to get kids to see that. And maybe trying to really hire the right people to cut them loose. Some may be gregarious, some may be on the shyer side, but you see something in them that when you close that door, that there's going to be amazing things that happen. And I would also say being curious. I love doing research. I love looking at all the pieces and say, how will this fit with that? Is there an element of symmetry to what we're doing? Look at the texture of a school, the balance, all of those design terms, and really thinking about them a lot.
Is there anything that you wish you would have known a little bit earlier on in your career that would have made it easier or better?
Yeah. Yeah. Adjusting my own energy, learning how to regulate, when you're young, it's like, and if you're idealistic, I remember I was teaching Lord of the Flies to a group of kids in Pensacola, and I had spent a couple of weeks, and that weekend just boom, 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 boom. And I went in there and I gave it my best shot, and I could tell I was losing him. I was heartbroken. I mean, I thought, how, and I'm sure I laid it on him. I spent the whole weekend doing this research or whatever. But, as you grow, you understand it's not about you. That's not, and so I think being more patient through the years, and yeah, more patient. Because if you are going to step into a leadership role, you don't want to look behind you, and you've gone so fast that no one is following you. So I think I started understanding that a little more. And when I was head of the program in Pensacola, I was probably the unlikely. I know people thought, well, why is JP Cohn selecting her? So, but he saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see it myself at that time because I was very young. But those teachers, they trained me to be an administrator. And sometimes things were thrown back in my face and I went, what? But boy, was it important. And most of them were older than I was, but they were very patient teaching me. And yeah.
So who have been some role models in your life? You've named a couple along the way, but who really sticks out as someone who's been there and inspired you?
Well, I mentioned Clint Wright, and I'll mention Jesse Jackson because Jesse Jackson and Clint Wright are pretty much not polar opposites. Their philosophies were similar and all, but Clint was big. And when I was the assistant superintendent, all I did was follow him around. And it was quite funny because he would, I mean, just being a fly on a wall with Clint, 6'7", full of life, biggest laugh. He saw people on the street and he knew he would ask them, not only using their name, how are you, but how's your mother? Does she still work at Walmart I mean, it blew my mind. I didn't know that. I'd heard him, but I didn't know his mind was amazing. And he had a wife, Deborah, that was his key researcher. So he would, he'd have an idea and then Deborah would, boom, lay it out. They were quite a couple. Jesse had a quieter leadership style. And I think Jesse taught me it just kind of, okay, just let it settle a little bit, let it settle. And he along the way. So both of them, I adored working with them. In Atlanta, I worked for the guy who was headmaster. I was head of secondary. He was, his name was Alec Horsley, and he was 6'7", big, tall British guy, just wonderful. And I went from a public school, and I actually stood there in carpool with tears in my eyes. I went from a public school where it was, don't go here, don't go there, bus kids, you can't go in the building if you're, all of this stuff. And then I went to Atlanta, in Atlanta International School. Oh, I think probably now it's probably $45,000 a year. And it's the families of Coke and Siemens and all the stuff. But I was there the second day and I was in carpool with him. Every car that came up, he opened the door and greeted them with just such friendliness, just, and I just thought, wow. And I thought, and one day I knew I would be back in public education, but I could have never worked for the regular public school system. But the juxtaposition was that I literally had tears in my eyes thinking, if public school kids could be greeted that way, and I'm talking about a large public high school, which, people feel like they have to compress to get control. I thought, wow, if they treated kids like that, how different things would be. And I feel like Atlanta International School, the Ross School, just totally laid the framework for what I had the great pleasure of doing and being a part of in Lake Wales. If I hadn't been there, I don't think I would have had the same mindset. But part of it was, how do you do things that wealthy private schools can do without the public funds to do it? But of course, I had, private donors that stepped up in a remarkable way. And I learned so much from Henry McCants, because he was our largest donor. I mean, he is a world-renowned venture capitalist, accomplishments just incredible. But he really did teach me a lot about, because I would talk things over with him. He taught me a lot about management. There was a a guy at Atlanta International School, an older man who he was head of Kimberly-Clark, but one big division. I think it was Europe, Africa, whatever. He was a big muckety muck there. We went to lunch at least once a month, and I feel like I had that one-on-one with a premier international businessman. At Ross, Howard Gardner was a key part of designing that school, but I probably would have never worked even remotely with Howard Gardner and some of the people I was able to work with if I had not been there. So, but all the time in the back of my mind is this, how can you do this like design on a dime? How can you take some of these ideas and give it to kids that maybe would never be able to afford? Certainly not all, because there's some very wealthy people in all the schools in Lake Wales. But yeah, so I would say in terms of not living, and there've been great teachers along the way, Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, I have always been fascinated with Leonardo da Vinci. Oh gosh, writers, I don't know, so many Atomic Habits. If yeah, James Clear, I get his newsletter. I still do. I love him. And I read a lot, or at least did. I don't read so much. Read everything management I could get my hands on. And then after a point, it all begins to sound alike. So you think, okay, let's move on. But so anyway.
On that note, any other resources that you consistently kept in your repertoire? You said you subscribed to Atomic Habits, the newsletter. Are there anything else that you keep current?
I still get Edutopia. I love George Lucas's foundation. I still get that. I get a lot of design stuff. There's this is something, you know, I love a lot of TED Talks, but there's also a thing called Edge. I don't even know if it exists or not anymore. It's just great thinkers getting together and talking about issues that are really complicated. I love that. But I'm teaching part-time, of course, at Pulse State. So that's taken up. I mean, I love it. It's wonderful. But yeah, so I have to keep up with that.
What's been your teaching philosophy, and how did that translate into your leadership philosophy?
A long time ago, I had a wonderful teacher, and I think just seeing great teachers, and I had some mediocre or worse ones too, but just having a few good teachers along the way that just blew my mind. And there was one guy, it was actually at University of West Florida, and I don't remember his name, but he taught English, and this was an American Lit class. Anytime in his class, I was blown away. Your vocabulary would just expand. And I was, my 20s. And I just thought, wow, and so he just put me on a trek to expand my vocabulary without even saying, hey, kid, you may want to dig into this. So I think looking at great teachers. Also read Plato, and I don't think it's the allegory of the cave, and so I can't remember which it is, but Plato said everything comes down to knowledge, conduct, and governance. Everything. And he wrote this essay about that. And so when I read that and started thinking about it, really thinking about it a lot in Atlanta, and I taught this course called Design and Discourse. And I taught the kids this, that everything in your life comes down to knowledge, conduct, and governance. And so I started looking at managing a school that way. What are the shared values that people have? What is the conduct and the culture? Thinking a lot about culture. What is the culture of the school? And what is the governance? What is too much? What is not enough? And that's where the design pieces come in. Also, I've read quite a few biographies of architects. I love that, the philosophy that they have.
What do you think that educators and teachers need to be mindful of as we're going to this next generation?
And I've told my kids this in my class. I said, those of you that are sitting here right now, they're fresh. It's a freshman seminar class. I said, AI is going to have such an impact on you. AI, I'm trying to really weave that into everything, because we do not know where it's going to go or really how it's going to reshape us. All that we know is it's going to reshape us. And, I'm sure there'll be some great things, and I'm sure there already is some disturbing things. So trying to get them to think about that. And for teachers, how do you maybe cautiously embrace it, but not have a teacher lose sight of really just being one-on-one with a kid or one-on-one in a class, and just that give and take that is so important. But it's definitely an exciting time.
So what are you most excited about in education? We've got the world at our fingertips, but what do you think is like, oh, wow, I can't believe this. Yay.
I guess the opportunities. And I hope that people, again, don't lose sight of just, I have a great niece who's 2.5, and I have been blown away by her. I mean, just her DNA, she wakes up a happy kid, and just how she explores and everything. It's been fascinating to watch. I wish schools would take more time to allow that to evolve and give kids just some time, because I do not think the return on investment of all the vast testing, I'm not convinced that it was all worth that, at the expense of taking away time with PE, taking away we're going to just read for the fun of it. Just wish we would return. I'm a big proponent of Montessori method, the Waldorf school, weaving that into things. And even you have to have a planner and a curriculum planner, but some of that I think is a load of hooey. And because if you don't seize the moments when kids, you see that they picked up on something, and you may want to stay with that a little longer. I was never one that said, oh no, I'm moving on. No, we're going to stay with this a little longer because you're so interested in it right now.
Do you have any advice to give to teachers today or leaders in education? Any nugget of wisdom?
Don't lose sight of what you went into this for in the beginning. If you can keep that kernel, that central core of why you wanted to be an educator, and revisit that occasionally, because it's tough. And I wouldn't want to be in it right now, because I love teaching, but I wouldn't want to. I don't know. I'd have a hard time just acting like this is kind of okay.
For someone to go up there and speak truth or speak passion, how do you do that? Like, what are you thinking when you're on stage with that microphone? You're at a graduation or you're at a invocation or something.
Um, yeah, well, I don't always hit it out of the park sometimes, but I really think through the years, okay, this goes back to Ruth Wolf, my speech teacher in high school. And you talk about an accomplishment. One of my accomplishments in high school is I was wittiest with this wonderful guy, yeah, Pete Farrington. So we were wittiest. So Mrs. Wolf took me aside one day, and she's no longer living, obviously, because I'm 73. She would be 150. She was incredible. Two things she did. One time in her class, she called to me and I wasn't ready for my speech. And so she didn't say anything, be ready a couple of days, whatever. So when I got my speech back, she said, I still have this paper. You can imagine how it looks after all these years. But she said, because you were honest, I won't give you a 0. I'm giving you a C+. Honesty matters. And it's in her handwriting, and I've saved it all these years. So Ruth Wolf, she also said one time, when I had the whole class, whatever smart remark I had made, and she kept me after class, and she said, I can't even remember. Bottom line was, okay, so you're, whatever, you could say things and people laugh. And she said, but you need to learn when to let it out, when to kind of reel it in, because there are moments that don't call for that. But she said there are moments that are. So I don't know how much paid attention to it, because I've actually never thought of it until just right now. But I thought of that as I was going up and growing up. And I know sometimes I said things that may have been too biting. And I look back on a couple of things and I went, was that really necessary? So I've tried to at least understand it, because it can be effective, but I don't know. So you asked where that comes from. So first of all, we have to assume that this is a good thing, and I'm good at it, I guess. Okay. I really think it's let go and let God. And so I was state chairman of March of Dimes youth group. And the first time I spoke in Houston, Texas, with 3 other teens, and it was like 500 kids. And the woman who was head of the thing, she said, you need to go to that room the night before you speak and just stand there. So I did. And I was all alone. I asked the guy, and I went and I stood there, and I just stood there. And the next day, I don't know, it was just a lot easier. And, but I can be a real smart aleck, but I feel like I've been able to help kids that also were smart aleck, saying, just because you think it, you don't have to say it. You don't have to say it. And then I had to think for myself, think this through for myself, where some people like my style. I'm sure some people don't, but it's not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Just kind of let it go. But having said that, as I got older, I started realizing the power of one's word. And I had a ex colonel in the Air Force who was a history teacher of Atlanta International School. And he said to me one day after a faculty meeting, he said, you may not believe this, but because of the role you're in, people hang on your words more than they possibly should or would. And I thought, wow, I'd never really thought of it that way. Not that it didn't shut down every thought, but maybe I started to edit myself a little more. So I am thankful because I think it's for whatever this is, because it's helped me in my career. Yeah, I can say that. And it doesn't freak me out, but sometimes I would get, nervous. Different times, different settings. But heck, 1,500 kids, not a better way to start your day, when we would be in the gym and we would be being silly and celebrating them. Yeah, no, weren't thinking about anything other than what is this moment, magical moment.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to close out. Oh, you did great. I loved hearing what you had to say. And thanks for being on EduCurious. Oh, I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I've always enjoyed every time that we've talked, because you are a seeker of what else do I need to know? What else you like a sponge taking it all in.